There you go. So welcome to the Ashwini. Ashwini's part of it's kind of a Nakshatra project, I guess. It's a work in progress, not a complete project yet. I don't know if it'll ever be complete. And here we are, we're starting in a very Ashwini way. Just kind of, well, I don't know. I've been doing all this like serious research for a couple of years now, and people are getting quite interested in it. And so I thought, okay, it's time to start share it and dive into it with people. And so Ashwini Nakshatra, I'm just going to screen share so we can sort of see the notes together. I was hoping to add a bunch of pictures to this before the class started, but my computer's too slow to deal with it, and then anything I did on the project takes a long time now. So, oh, there we go. There's our Ashwini. So we get this Ashwini Nakshatra, and it's famously ruled by the Ashwini Kumaras, which are the horse-headed twins. The horse's head is interesting. There's another guru, a sage with a horse's head, Darachi, and he's also a very wise one, and also got some knowledge of healing and restoration. I haven't added him in here, but he should be here actually. One of the most important things about all of these nakshatras, two of the things we really have to keep track of is the planetary ruler of the nakshatra, which is hugely influential. And a lot of the deities that are ruled by nakshatras are also very important, because in a way our lives are these replaying of the myths. That's really all our lives are. It's just replaying these old myths of the gods and the archetypes, or whatever you want to call them. So we'll often see those same themes come in of the mythological stuff come into our lives. Now, Ashwini Kumaras are interesting. So this is right where energy is initiated. Something suddenly kind of comes from nothing, you could say. And so you get this, it's very chaotic. I know in like acupuncture, for example, they talk about the fingertips and the tips of the toes. They call them spring points. And this is where the energy is very chaotic. It's just coming or it's just going. And so there's no control on it. Get to the second nakshatra, Bharani, it has to do with the rains. It kind of pulls back a little bit. But Ashwini is it's very quick. Anything to do with the Ashwini is going to initiate things very fast, and all kinds of things. It's a very chaotic energy, and to most people, it's something is always going to be odd about that energy of Ashwini. All the Ketu nakshatras, something a little bit odd about it, something unusual, almost alien in a sense. And so there's this, it's like a baby when they're fresh born and they just come out of the womb. It's like an alien, man. It's really strange. And that energy, it's like nobody knows what that thing's going to become. It's just this little, oh, here it is. What is it? It's even like, I'm kind of taking care of a garden now, and you get this, some little thing, sprout comes out of the ground. And before it even has any leaves or anything, you're looking at it, you don't know what it is. You're like, oh, what is that? It's something. I'll leave it for now. Let's see. It's probably a weed, but anyways, you wait sometimes, right? You're hoping it's that seed you planted. There is something to do also with all the Ketu nakshatras, a little bit to do with seeds or powder or dust. There's always something mystical about Ketu nakshatras, like that, like quite literally mist, that kind of fog, right? I used to live in a rainforest up in Canada, and it was really foggy and misty, and you look into the forest and it was kind of this diffused light and the mist. And this is kind of the atmosphere. And that's really, you could say, the sign and the nakshatra. That's really what they are, is they're setting the atmosphere for whatever planet is there, for whatever energy is going on. And so the atmosphere of that Ashwini is this atmosphere of anything can happen. And oh, what is that? It's all kind of misty. I can't quite see. Uh, One of the funny things I noticed about this, I'm going to kind of speak all over the place a bit here. One of the unique things I noticed about this is they talk a lot about Ashwini being related with sound healing. And it is, there's a lot of that healing factor there in Ashwini. And you can see like even ultrasound and those sorts of things, all that sound waves. I really think Ashwini has to do with this idea in, say, string theory, where the universe is both a wave and a particle, right? And those theories don't come together. So Ashwini is really, there's a strong duality, and I'm giving another class right now. Yesterday I was giving class, I was talking about this duality. So Ashwini is at that point where you could say Anavalamala, the initial impurity of individuality starts. And that, it's funny because individuality starts when you break off from something else. In a way, you could say the umbilical cord's getting cut, or the yeah, it's kind of breaking away sort of energy with this Ashwini. Now, so any page you go to on an Ashwini, you're going to find this exact same information that's here. You're going to find up to here. Now, Ashwini is not a great example. I haven't done maybe full research on Sage Marichi, for example, here. But one of the things we'll notice with the sages, the sages are they're the great fathers in Hinduism, the heads of lineages, you could say. And so in a way, especially when we get, say, an ascendant or a moon or these really personal planets, then what we're going to find is that these gurus, this sage Marichi, these people who have the placements here, they're somehow responsible for light and sound, like ultrasound, for example, and a lot of that energy, a lot of energy work and that sort of stuff. But they get these sorts of responsibilities to learn a lot of the ceremonies. You'll find a lot of people like, I don't want to quite say masters of ceremonies, but you know, these people that like start the ceremony, they come in and they're like maybe it's in music sometimes, right? You get someone, they come out, like sometimes if you go, I don't know, I've probably changed since I was young and going to these big concerts. But I remember going to one, it was actually, the first act was actually a comedian. The first act was always, it was something strange or some new or alternative band would be up there. Nobody ever heard of it. And they would get up and they would play. And that's kind of that Ashwini energy. Whereas the main band comes and they play later. But Ashwini always starting things off. Can be a little bit ahead of their time, right? It's maybe that even that entertainment that comes before the party starts kind of thing. Or there's always this sort of being out in front. Now, we can see here, Sage Marichi also has to do, he's also dealing with food and eating etiquette, a lot of these marriage rituals. Again, he's starting something new. And so these are all that initial spark, right? That initial light, all that sort of stuff. Now, this is interesting here too, that Sage Marichi, he denounced renunciation. And he said, no, we have to do our worldly duties. I think part of the way that relates with Ashwini is Ashwini people are very active. They're not going to sit down. They're not going to just give up on anything. They always want to start something new. And well, if you're always starting something new, it's hard to be a big, a sage in the forest sort of thing. And so they usually get out in the world, but they get out in the world, there's still often something spiritual about these Ashwinis. Often it's not on the surface, but it's inside. It's like Tesla actually has a lot of Ashwini placements, and he's like, well, he was so far ahead of his time. All of his stuff, nobody understood it at all. I was just seeing if someone would get lost. And nobody understood any of that at all, but he's kind of these days, he's kind of revered as a spiritual guru. But even back then, he was cut away from the rest of the scientific community. He lived out of town, he lived with a bunch of gypsies. There's always something a little bit, it's not relating with Marici, but there's always something relating with an alternative lifestyle somehow with Ashwini placements as well. And someone like Tesla really, really epitomizes Ashwini in so many ways. He lived with the like I said, he lived with the gypsies. There's a lot of speculation on Tesla's relationships, whether he was gay, whether he was straight, whether he had anything to do with that sort of thing. Now, I find this is a very common theme with Ashwinis. There's someone in the background all the time that it's like kind of questionable. People don't really know. There's a pairing or a twin, but one of the twins is away, and so it looks actually like it's just Tesla, for example. But then there's like, oh well, maybe he had some crazy gypsy sort of person helping him out. I think Rumi. Now there's not very. I don't even think there's a good date for Rumi's birth, but Rumi also sort of, he had shams, right? Kind of come and lock himself in his room, and Rumi's this great mystic saint. And his guru was Shams, but nobody knows anything about Shams, just that he kind of disappeared and they don't even know how that happened. And so there's often this sort of other in the background that's almost a metaphysical other. For some people, it could be like this connection to a higher being. You'll find some people with this placement, they're doing channeling, kind of, right? They got this direct connection to a spirit, and they kind of sort of speak or embody the voice of that spirit. You find this in very practical ways as well. It's like the truck driver who has a dispatcher, right? Just this very independent truck driver. He's out there by himself. It looks like he's like, whatever, just doing his own thing. But actually his whole life is directed by some dispatcher who's saying, yeah, you want to go pick that up there and take it there, and then do this and do that. And so a lot of times if Ashwinis don't have that, they fall into almost a mental problems. They fall into a kind of depression, right? They need someone to kind of give them direction, or they get too scattered. Again, that someone could be a higher voice or spiritual voice, but in some way it needs that sort of higher direction. We find them relating again with spirit class and the business class. Now, one of the things the merchant class is responsible for is they're kind of responsible for innovations and bringing new things into the field. They're that, in a way, the merchant class is the gatekeeper between the inventors and the customer, right? The person who makes something and the one who wants it. And so there is that kind of sort of a middleman thing going on with a lot of the merchant class nakshatras as well. We think of the merchants, we think they're just selling, right? But actually they're moving things, just like Ashwini is. They're moving it from that person to that person. And really that's what money is all about. Money has a lot to do with the flow of goods, right? And just keeping, right? We need food to move. It has to get from the farm to my mouth somehow. And so Ashwinis are often involved with this sort of movement and transportation sort of stuff, and all of that. And so we find this caste is something, wow, it's a little bit tricky in Vedic astrology, right? But we can generally speaking, we could say like whatever caste of the nakshatra that their moon or their ascendant is in, so Ashwini sort of moon or ascendant, they are quite likely to belong more to the merchant caste, right? Now that's tricky because say they have ascendant in Ashwini. Well, that means they have an Aries ascendant, and so they belong right away. You would say, oh well, they're Kshatriya, they're a warrior, they're a leadership type person, and of course the Ashwinis are also this. But down below the surface, they're kind of that leader. They take that initiative, that sort of kshatriya qualities and use them almost in a merchant type way. And so actually they're really good at business and they can be very critical in a lot of ways and handle a lot of criticism, because one of the hallmarks of a very highly innovative people is that 90%, maybe 99% of their innovations are going to be garbage, right? It's only going to be that one or two that's really good. And so Ashwinis are very good also at taking criticism. No, that's garbage. No, that's garbage. No, that's garbage. That's a bad idea. That's dumb. That's stupid. Don't do that. Right. And so Ashwinis kind of get a lot of that. But of course, as they age, then depending on the placements, but as they age, there's usually less of those bad ideas and more of the good ideas, because all of those energies start to evolve. And I think that also relates to the merchant, because they realize that, and maybe this was Tesla's problem in a sense, but generally speaking, if you're going to make something new, it also has to be useful to someone. It has to be able to go somewhere from that. Here's my idea. And a lot of Tesla's ideas didn't do that in his lifetime. But of course, now well, thank you, Tesla, for giving me this ability to talk with you guys. Right. So at least if you're doing any kind of work online, Tesla then becomes and I would say even energy work, right? Tesla really becomes a big guru for everybody that way. So then we get to the Dharma, right? We've got these four kinds of motivation: Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Dharma is direction. Dharma is the way, the path. They usually say the righteous way, but we'll say the way. And it's a very spiritual. Dharma and Moksha are very spiritual. There's usually something spiritual about their purpose, about their motivation, right? So Dharma people, they're looking for some kind of righteousness. They're looking for some sort of to do things right, to some meaning and purpose in what they're doing. You could say that's their motivation. And then you have Kama, and their motivation is the kind of moksha trine, and their motivation is moksha and liberation. And the other two, Artha and Kama, they're usually more materialistic kind of motivations that we have in life. Artha is kind of gathering up sort of things and collecting wealth, and the Kama has a lot to do with enjoyment. And we'll find in astrology, like, I should actually go to a little chart somewhere, but when we talk astrology, we have like there's 3 Dharma houses and 3 Kama houses and 3 Artha and 3 Moksha houses. And so the Dharma houses is like the 1st, the 5th, and the 9th house. And so we find a lot of that direction, a lot of things to do with the individual and individuality in Dharma. A lot of our sort of intelligence ceremony and ceremonial sort of stuff has a lot to do with Dharma, celebration, and celebratory events, all that sort of stuff has to do with Dharma. And of course, those are the 3 great areas of our lives. Really, a lot of our luck and everything has to do with Dharma. And well, if we think of Dharma that way as having to do with our luck, because it's like sometimes you have a choice to make. You don't know which way to go. What is my true path? What is my calling? And then what happens is, just by some luck of the universe will show you your true calling. It will show you your true way. And there's a lot of luck involved in the Ashwini as well, right? Because they're just making anything and doing any new old thing. And in a sense, it's only by luck that it's actually going to be a good idea, for example. So there's a lot of luck and a lot of Dharma sort of mixed in with that. Now, this next part, the swiftness and the lightness. Now, I'm going to bring this up because I think this is important that we go over this today. Should have had this ready, but I wasn't thinking of it at the time. Oh, it's not that document. So a lot of these attributes of the nakshatras, they come from Ayurveda actually. Oh, there's more down here. They come from Ayurveda actually. And so there's all these sort of dualities kind of going on with these attributes. And so we find that the Ashwini attributes is this lightness and the swiftness. And of course, everybody sort of knows that about the Ashwinis. They're very, very quick. There's always something. Let's scroll down and come back. But there's always this, there's almost a rebound effect, I find in Ashwini, right? It kind of, you'll find like kind of search and rescue. You go in and you extract. You go in and you come out. You go there, you come back, right? And so there's a lot of this sort of movement back and forth with Ashwini. In a way, we see that, we can see that in the wave. We see that in a lot of the polarities and that sort of stuff. But the Ashwini Nakshatra in particular is very, very quick and going there. This is also like Brahma is related with Ashwini Nakshatra. And of course, Brahma is the creator god, right? So this is a lot of new creation, that innovation, that invention. But a lot of times it's like anything, even if it seems like it's brand new, in a sense, it's not. A lot of times it's taking some old thing and changing it and innovating it and making it new again. Or you'll see some. I was studying when I had one client, this was a client I had, and what he would do is he would take these old cars, right, these old broken down cars, really old classic cars, but they were completely just junk. There were you couldn't make a car out of it anymore. And so what he would do is he would like cut off the front headlight part, right? And he would, I don't know, make a plant pot out of it, make a shelving unit out of these old car parts, right? And so it's finding that old thing and finding a new use for it, making it useful in some new sort of way. And there's a lot of innovation in that. Like, well, who would think of making a shelving unit out of a car, right? I guess like people do that, but it's a lot of Ashwini energy and that creativity. And so there's a lot of that sort of making something new here. Then we find the Deva. And so here you get this different categorizations of each nakshatra. Either it's a Deva, a Raksha, or a human. Now, I should have mentioned this on some of the other stuff. Now, this commonly gets used actually. There's a few criterias they use for chart matching for relationships and stuff. And Deva is one of them. And you don't worry about it too much. And most people, we don't even hardly have to learn this. Nice to know. But this gets pulled into, when you get the nakshatra score of like you line up like a Swati and a Ardra person, and it gives you a score on how those two people are going to match. And so there's a whole bunch of different criteria they use to come up with that score. And this is part of that. And it's quite important because it's worth 8 points out of that score. And generally they say like two devas, two godly people should get together, or two Raksha people, or two human people is the best. They give a little bit, they're like, well, if a Raksha and a Deva get together, it's not bad. I think they get one. I don't know if I wrote that here, but anyways, I think they get 1 point but if like a human goes with a Raksha or a Deva, they say they don't get any points at all. Now, I think we kind of like, in a way, I suppose these are different ways we can categorize people generally out in the world. You get these people who are, I think, more attuned. Well, we call the Rakshas, we translate it as demons. There's so many horrible translations of Sanskrit words. This is one of them. Because the Rakshas aren't really demons. They're Ashuras. Maybe they're the mystics. They're the unorthodox. They're the heterodox side of things, the unusual side of things. The Devas are usually more that orthodoxy. So you get, for example, like I describe this to a lot of people, like Venus is the guru of the Ashuras, of the Rakshas. And well, who's going to call Venus the guru of all the arts? Who's going to call him the demon? Right? Well, there were times in Christianity when the arts were demonized, right? And some of these Orthodox religions really did demonize the arts and a lot of innovation. And whose chart was it? Oh yeah, it was Michelangelo's chart I was looking at. I think he had Jupiter in Ashwini. I can't remember. Um, so he was a great artist, but he did say the Last Judgment and the like a lot of the Sistine Chapel paintings he did. And so he did this Last Judgment, Final Judgment on the behind the altar. And so you got God and the devil, and you've got all that duality that's relating with Ashwini. But he made the Virgin Mary and Jesus Christ, he made them, painted them completely naked, which was like fully sacrilegious at the time. Now, this was obviously fairly, like this was a high Renaissance, towards the end of the Renaissance period. So they were fairly open, but this was crossing the line. Right, because they were doing all that art and sculpture. Well, that was crossing the line. And so there is this, we do find something sort of spiritual, sort of deva, sort of higher. They're looking for those higher values somehow in Ashwini. Now, we find a lot of all these nakshatras have some kind of contradictions in them, right? Because he's a merchant, he's not a Brahmin, but here he is, he's a deva and he's worshiping Brahma, right? And so they're a merchant, but they're often dealing with some kind of spiritual nature or something of some higher sort of value, maybe. And we see those sorts of things with the Ashwinis. There's some spiritual connection. It's like Michelangelo, like he was an artist. He was actually an architect as his training. And but here he is, he's connected with all the greatest saints and all these, like the Vatican hired him to do so many. But for him, it was actually, he was more concerned with a lot of the mythology. Like he did sculptures of Bacchus and he did sculptures of, that's really with a lot of these, like the Last Judgment, some mythological scene back there. And so there's a lot of that sort of mythological or alternative spirituality comes into play with Ashwini. And Ashwini, it's the placement of the stars is Ashwini, it's in the head of the Ram when we look up at the sky. And so these people can also be very headstrong, right? And you have to be to innovate because everybody's going to say, no, that's a dumb idea. That's what I know. And you keep going. You're like, oh, I'm going to do it anyways. I'll just, boom, I'll go through. I have a Ketu in Ashwini in my chart. And so maybe that has something to do with my impossible plans that I generally try to carry through as best to my ability. Now,
I have a question.
Kate, go ahead.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's related to the Deva and the humans and Rakstaha.
Yep.
I'm kind of confused as to like, how do you know if a person is like either or like how does it work, or is it like related to the houses or like, or
Well,
I mean you don't have to answer like
no,
it's
so if
related
someone
so
has
much.
a moon or ascendant in Ashwini and there's strong indications of that, they're going to have some, they're going to be trying to do what's right. They're always going to be trying to do something that helps achieve. I'm going to explain a little bit Deva in a little bit, but they're going to be trying to achieve something that has a higher purpose or higher meaning. And the Devas really, like Jupiter's the guru of the Devas. And so he's teaching people to do the difference between right and wrong and follow justice and try to, carry out justice. Whereas Venus is like, well, he's not so much concerned with teaching justice. He's more concerned with fairness. He's more concerned with equity. He's more concerned with the way things look than really the truth of the matter. And so Venus is kind of more concerned with like, don't worry about doing what's right and wrong. It's like trying to live a beautiful life. Try to appreciate the beauty and show gratitude. And it's more, again, that mystical side, that feminine side of religion is kind of the Rakshas, the Ashuras. Again, not so much concerned with doing what's right like the devas. And so, yeah, you get more of that sort of side of things in the devas. The human side in this and all of this, and I'll kind of go into these more when I come to the nakshatras, but the human side of this is more like humans generally try to do what's right, but they often get it wrong. Um, and we're trying to play both sides of that. You could say we're the great tantrics because tantra is all about like achieving moksha liberation and getting bhoga enjoyment. And so you're trying to balance between like enjoying life and living a spiritual life. And that's humans. And so we're like, the devas are more, they're really trying to achieve a perfection somehow. And they kind of do. They're kind of, you could say in a way, they're these perfect people sometimes. Of course, if there's malefics and other aspects, but the devils will generally be like these kind of perfect, upright people in a way, where the Ashuras, they don't mind being a little bit sloppy and having a little few shadows, um, a little bit. And so you get that sort of difference where the humans are kind of in between all of that. And well, the devils and the Rakshas are both immortals. And I think and so they're kind of what they're doing in life is sort of they're part of this eternal plan, in a sense. And that's why you can sometimes mix a Deva and a Raksha to a certain degree. And if we look at myths, once in a while they did get married, they did get together, these blended mixed couples. And so, and I would say that the Ashwinis, they're devas, but they're probably going to be more likely to have a mixed relationships. Ashwini relationships are a little bit. This is a truth for pretty much all the Ketu nakshatras. Freedom. They no boundaries, no walls. Don't hold me back from anything. And so, especially if Venus is an Ashwini, for example, but you're going to see this all the way through. Because they don't like boundaries, their relationships also become unbounded. And so you might get some bisexuality, you might get some gays, you might get some lesbians, you might get people who are just married to God, relationships aren't all that important. You might get people who are having like, I think it was Jaja Gabor, I think she had Jupiter in Ashwini, and Jupiter represents the husband in a woman. She was married like 9 times, right? Like there's like, what does even a marriage mean to that woman? Well, what does it mean in the modern age? But she was a big part of breaking down those boundaries, especially from the female perspective. So we see that sort of unboundedness in Ashwini. Now, passive. That's certainly something to say about Ashwini, isn't it? And so we get sometimes these things that don't really make sense because, well, this is Aries, it's just starting in Ashwini. And so you'd go, awesome, what's going on here? But there is this sort of, I think that's part of like, again, this can relate to Ketu as well, because Ketu is sort of he's the witness. He's the passive one. And so this placement, I found a lot of people we talked about music before and the healing quality, but I found a lot of people like doing these like acid jazz or a lot of like jam band sort of people. And so like when you're a jam band, there's not like you're playing a song together. You're just like, they're playing this and they're playing that. You're just like a bunch of musicians, just like jamming, just putting something, making something new that, well, a lot of cases they could never repeat it again, right? And so there is this passive quality of just reacting to what comes sort of thing, like just taking what comes and using that somehow. Like the guy using the car, like, oh, I need a shelf. Oh, well, I don't have any wood, but I got that old car out back, whatever, right? And so I noticed this for a few nakshatras, but there's a very, for the Western audience, a very MacGyver sort of quality to that, right? MacGyver was with the Indian people. I have his chart. I see he's still training, but it was this old show when I was a kid. Andrian probably doesn't even know MacGyver. But MacGyver was this show, and so he would go in and he would always get like some bad guys would lock him in a room with nothing but some bubble gum and a couple like odd things laying around. And next thing you know, he'd make a bomb or he would save the day, just these random sort of things. And so there's that sort of a quality to Ashwini of just using what comes, very sort of passive, like what God gives me, that'll come out. And so they're often not really actively sort of trying to make something new, you could say. They're just what comes, we'll use that. Now we get some tamasic quality to this. This also has to do with Ketu, right? Ketu is an outcast. And anyways, in this case, is a merchant, so I suppose we can't call Ashwini an outcast. But there is this tamasic quality to it. There is this very dark and ignorance and inertia. That relates to some of the passive qualities of this nakshatra. But tamasic is and this is one of those things that I guess really, you look at Ashwini and you go, tamasic. How could Ashwini be tamas? Because we think of that inertia of tamas, where Ashwini is very active, just the opposite of that inertia. But I think there's this like, they don't know what is going to happen from their actions, right? And so if you're really working on the side of righteousness, like say for healing example, and Ashwini often gets connected with healing. Well, one of the things they would say with the healer is do no harm. But one of the things with Ashwini is they don't know what kind of side effects might come or what the result is going to be from their actions. So actually, a lot of times, a lot of harm does come from Ashwinis. And a funny thing I noticed, especially when you get to the third and fourth padas of Ashwinis, those seem to be the much more sort of aggressive nakshatras, where you get sort of warrior people, you get people who are, even you'll find this, like they're devas, right? But they're very tamasic minded. And so if we think of this in a classical example, Deva Premal, right? That really great spiritual singer, beautiful voice, incredible voice. She brought Gayatri to the whole Western world, I think. So Deva Premal, she's bringing all these beautiful mantras, and she's the soft spiritual sort of soul. But if you went and asked some very orthodox Brahmin guru in India about Deva Premal, well, she's very tamasic, actually. She's sleeping around with a bunch of guys. She has different boyfriends. She had that husband. She's sometimes once in a while drinking alcohol, smoking guns. It's like very tamasic, right? Like she's spiritual. She's this great, almost like a saintly woman in the Western world for these beautiful sort of bhajans and the sort of stuff she's singing. But when we look from the classical perspective, very tamasic. Same with like Tesla, right? There's that, he's this very spiritual and very connected to energy, like in that regards. And he's the big Guruji, but all these sort of rumors about Tesla, he was also a very tamasic man. And so you can get these, just by the nakshatra alone, we can see a lot of the internal contradictions that people have. And we all have contradictions somehow. I love Nietzsche's quote. I followed it my whole life. Since I was a kid, I read this. Contradict myself. Of course I contradict myself. I'm huge. I'm full of possibilities. And Ashwini is full of possibilities. Like just overflowing. Things are just coming out of these Ashwinis like crazy. And so when there's no real discretion, because really that's what sattvic really, there's a lot of discretion in sattvic qualities, you could say, but there's no discretion in Ashwini, and so it becomes very sort of tamasic. Now, earth element, this again we find it's hard to sort of compare with say Ketu's rulership, like how does that relate with the earth? But this is the so if we think of, in the other class I'm giving, we talked about the tattvas that go from like 36 tattvam from Shiva to earth. And so what happens is Shiva is the great, well, there's not even an idea there, right? We get down a little bit going through the Maya, and then you get this Purusha, you get this sort of sort of soul energy, and then you get these energies of the mind that are still like not very earthy, and then you get something that exists, right? You get an idea and you bring it out, and now it's earth. It's like Shiva has descended to creation. And sometimes they say Shiva loved the earth most, because he could have kept going. He could have descended. It's Shiva, he can do anything, but he came down to the earth. And so he came down. People that follow Shaivism, they usually have such a big heart for the lowest caste and the lowest sort of people in the world, and they want to help them. And Ashwinis also want to help them. And so this has to do with the earth element and Shiva coming down. And Shiva he loves the earth. He loves the gross and the disgusting and the ghosts and the goblins and the ghouls and all of that are really sort of like repugnant to the ether element, right? To the higher spiritual elements. And so this does relate a little bit with the tamasic qualities of Ashwini. And really, again, Ashwini it's Anavalamala. It's that original impurity of individuality, which in the Western world, they would say it's original sin. And so there are these kind of earthy tamasic qualities to it, even though it's still a very spiritual sort of energy. Now, that we can see. Now, here's something else. This is an area, I guess I still need to kind of dive into the research on this a little bit. But we say the Ashwini is the earth element. And so by that, generally, what they're going to say is that planets that say, sorry, I gotta take a breath here. Just give me one moment. I'm gonna get some water. Okay, so say for example, the moon is in Ashwini. And now from the earth element perspective of this, the moon, because water is impeded by earth, or the earth kind of blocks water from being able to fully kind of spread out and sort of express itself. On another hand, that's usually good, right? You get a little bit deeper. And so there is this, you get a water sign in the earth, and what you want to do is the Ashwini will help to make that person more deep, but they won't be able to spread out so much. They've become very kind of focused much more. And so we can see how on the elemental aspect, that's going to be how these things might relate. Something like fiery signs, Mars in the earth element. The earth can kind of feed fire, but the area, the earth itself, anyways, it gets kind of eaten up by the fire. And so there's a lot of energy there. There's a lot of power there. It's going to be kind of a good placement for the Mars, but there's going to be some troubles with the house that Aries is in, for example, that Ashwini is in. There'll be some troubles in the house due to the fire, but the fire does well. The Mars side does well. And so you can kind of use this. So like planets that don't get along well with Earth aren't going to do well here. Planets that do get along, but there's often a bit of, anyways, the way these elements kind of work, they get along in one way and not in others. But we'll find the similar sort of thing with the Ayurvedic qualities here. So that, and so we'll find, again, it'll be, it's already Vata. And so if you put a Vata Aries planet in there, like Venus, for example, Venus, you get almost too much Vata. And so what happens, that was Rajaja Gabor and her nine husbands, 9 relationship. you get too much Vata, you get too much movement. And so Venus doesn't really do well in Ashwini because there's too many relationships, too much freedom in the relationship. There's a lot of reasons they don't do well. Relationships don't do well, but that Vata quality becomes too much, too high. And same with the fire in there. It gets almost too much activity, right? They get too active, they're too mobile. They can be very strong, and that sort of thing is all right, but they end up burning themselves out later in life. They're kind of shrivel very quickly. Now, we can also think like if the moon is here, says earth element and Vata. So this is like, and then we get, it's in Aries, which we can say is like fire. And so, again, the moon is quite sensitive to everything that's around it. And so the moon in Ashwini kind of gets pulled around a little bit because there's so many different elemental influences on the moon here. And so it's really hard for them to think like really, really clearly, you could say, because there's all this bouncing around in a sense. And now Vata generally, of course, what you're going to find, well, once it ever is that all that bouncing around, we usually attribute that with Vata. And so you get this kind of Vata mind, especially when moon is there. If you get the ascendant there, that's going to affect the body, the Vata in the body a bit more. And so you get that Aries fire quality, but underneath that, there's this airy quality. And again, so when you get fire and air, it's like, well, you know what happens when you blow on the fire. You get these uprisings. And so you'll get that also when you put the fiery signs there. And so we can kind of see how that works with the different signs. The male nakshatra, some of this stuff I still need to do some research on because there's different theories of this, but I'm not sure. I haven't quite gone into it fully. But so this is a male nakshatra, a masculine energy. Now, the way that they say this generally gets used is, say, the fifth lord, which is your children, is in Ashwini. What they say is you're more likely to have male children. Now, I would say there is a good chance of that because the fifth lord is there, because it's Aries, which is a masculine sign, and we get a masculine sign in the nakshatra as well. So you get that sort of double masculine. Now, this is also something, what I noticed is generally the male nakshatras are usually easier for masculine male people to handle. And their lives are a little bit, you could say a little bit easier, right? Same with if a female is born in a female nakshatra, her life is kind of a bit easier. But a female born in Ashwini nakshatras, it becomes a little bit difficult. It's like the good old fashioned days when a woman goes to work in a man's field. It's hard on her, right? It's just going to be harder. It's not that a woman can't do it, but it's going to be a bit tougher. And so when a woman has planets placed in Ashwini, she's going to find that a little bit like she's in this little bit of a masculine field. She has to kind of get in touch with her more masculine side, her more sort of energetic side in order to do that work, which of course a little bit more difficult usually for women to do. And so you get these things a little bit, you get some, like generally in astrology, they say, oh, there's not really a difference whether you're a man or a woman with these placements, but there is a difference. There's a difference if you're a male welder or a female welder, right? That's going to make a big difference on the job and the way things happen. So, and again, these nakshatras and the signs and all of that, that's the area, you could say, that's the atmosphere that the work is getting done in. Now, when they talk about the face, which way it's facing, they talk about looking up or straight or downwards. Now, I've read some different theories on this. Again, I still need to dive into a little bit of this research a little bit more, but they say the one who is facing straight ahead. Well, one of the things they say is this has to do with the way you're born. And so if you're facing straight ahead, especially I think if you're ascendant is there, but moon is there, then when you come out, you do come out head first. And if you're facing downward, then you might come out backwards, for example, or looking forward. And so there's these sorts of things. They've talked a little bit about how the planet might give results. I've read these things about how they might give results in the beginning, middle, or the end of its period, depending on which way that the nakshatras are facing. Now, these things are a bit tricky because generally the planets themselves, it's like Saturn. A Saturn dasha will give its results, its fruit at the end of the period. Mercury will give you a little bit at the beginning and a little bit at the end. And so, anyways, there's still some work. But what we also see is their focus. Here can be straight ahead. It's like if we see people walking down the street, for example, the one who's looking facing forward and facing straight ahead, we tend to think of them energetically. They have more confidence. They're very forward looking, and it's has to do with that some innovation of Ashwini, where they're looking forward. Where the downward glancing ones, they're more looking into research. They're more looking down. They're more looking to kind of uncover things. And they might even be looking into the past, you could say. And so you get some of these sort of different ways. Now the levelness as well with the forward look. Oh, that was a while ago I saw that. I can't remember if it was in Ashwini or not, but I was looking at this sort of levelness. And what I was seeing with that, this nakshatra that had the level look, is these people were often, there was a lot of like engineers and surveyors, right? And that's what they're doing. They're always leveling. Even if it's not level flat, it's level at a 1% grade. It's smooth at a 2% grade, right? And so you get this sort of sense of leveling things out. If we go into that sort of leveling, there's so many different kinds of levels, but they want usually things to be fairly clear somehow. Now, that's a tough thing to say for Ashwini because nothing's ever really clear for them. There's always some fog. They always kind of don't know anything. Now, the directions of these nakshatras. So I write this again, a lot of theoretical stuff and things I've picked up about it. I have seen, though, that in the periods of the nakshatras, people will often kind of move in that direction of the nakshatra. There'll be some, it's like even if you still live in the same town, all of a sudden you'll find something that you have to do on the south side of town, for example. And something sort of kind of draws you towards the south all the time. Another way, I haven't put this into my research at all yet, but I should. And well, I've been saying that for a year now. It's there, I can put it in easily. But each of the nakshatras has a mantra, a very classical sort of Vedic mantra relating with them. And so what they would say is if you're going to do the mantra for Ashwini, you would want to face in the southern direction, right? If you're going to put up any kind of a picture of Ashwini, you might want to put it on the southern wall of your home so that when you look to the south, you look at Ashwini, those sorts of things. So these directions can also be used in the worship. Usually whenever you're using the directions in worship, it's usually like the tantrics like these kind of things, the mystics like these sort of things. I think I mentioned in the class, it was a class yesterday, we talked about how all the mystics, usually before they start anything, they set themselves in space and they pay homage to each of the directional deities. And so we could think as the Ashwini as sitting in the southern side of the Havan, you could say. Like that. And so we might want to seat ourselves on the southern side to do an Ashwini practice or something like that. Now, this is no surprise for Ashwini. It's rolled over. The animal for it is the stallion, the stud. And that, in Ashwini's case, that relates directly with the symbol of Ashwini, which is the horse. Of course, it's not always the case with all the nakshatras that way. But the male horse, this was beautiful. I've been looking up like the mating behaviors of all these animals that deal with the nakshatras. And the male horse is quite something. And we see this as Ashwini, they're very playful, flirty, and they can be very flirty and very playful when they flirt. And that's really what the male horse does. And he's very playful until the female horse sort of reciprocates, right? And we can see this in well, it's not the way with all the animals, right? Some can be very forceful. The dogs, the cats, these sort of sexual animals, they can really push sex on their partner. Where the horses they're very playful and they're very flirty, and the horse is never going to go beyond that playfulness and flirtiness until the partner says, okay, let's do this, and find some reciprocation. And you could say reciprocation it's maybe very important to Ashwinis generally, right? That's because it's that back and forth sort of thing going on. And so they really want that sort of reciprocation. And so you find these Ashwinis, they are very playful, and their relationships. Now the female horse, we'll find the female horse in Saturn Nakshatra, which is way up in Aquarius. And so that becomes like, because the animal relates with the creativity potential of a couple, you could say. It gets used in matching to a limited degree. I would say in modern matching, it can be these animals are maybe more important because, well, modern people aren't looking, even when they're getting married, I don't even think anyone's thinking forever anymore. They're thinking until we divorce. And so that sort of sexual side of the relationships is quite important to Western people, and a lot of these more short-term sort of relationships. Or that sort of creativity. They come together, they make a baby, and it goes from there. But I think in a broader sense, we can use these animal spirits, I want to call them, of the nakshatras in a way of like, well, if Ashwini wants to create something new, it pairs very well with Satyabhishak, right? And so if you want to start a new business and you have Ashwini placements, find a Satyabhishak partner, at least to get things started and get things sort of kicked off, you could say. There's also an interesting relationship between Ashwini and Satyabhishak when it comes to healing. Is that they say generally if you start a healing therapy in Satyabhishak, you'll get the fruit of that therapy in Ashwini. Now, this is kind of funny because then on the other hand, then they also say that Ashwini on the transiting moon, for example, what I'm talking about here, is they say Ashwini is a very good time to start any kind of new healing therapies. Well, if we follow that old sloka, actually Satyabhishak was the really good time to start the therapy, and Ashwini is the really good time to sort of see the results of the therapy. And so you get a bit of different, but I'd say generally they're both pretty good that way. Now, strychnine, poison, arsenic, basically, is the tree of Ashwini. And I see Shiva everywhere. Okay, I'll just tell you that right now. I see Shiva all over the place. But but generally, Shiva has a strong relationship with any of the poisonous plants that are out there. And so Shiva also, it's like, but there's usually some way where we figure out that at least for one particular illness, we can transform the poison of that plant and make it a medicine. And this is a very shamanic sort of thing to do as well, from a Western perspective. And so we find that with this poison nut tree. Now, we'll see if I wrote below some of the uses for that. I'm not a master of herbalism. Everything here is I just get from research, and a lot of times I don't fully understand it. But we find these, like, from the poison nut, we can use it for anti-inflammatory But they also use it as like, again, adding that poison so that humans don't drink it, for example, right? This is like, you got to be very careful with rubbing alcohol, because back in the old days, you got the drunks, you can buy rubbing alcohol in the store for 99 cents or something, right? And you can get completely hammered off 100 proof alcohol. But we've made that for rubbing, we've made that for sterilization uses, which also kind of relates also with Ashwini. And actually, to a certain degree, all the Ketu Nakshatras, well, Ketu can be poisonous and things like that, but there's a purity to Ketu Nakshatras that you don't get even with Sun Nakshatras. Like, that's what the sun does, he purifies us. But Ketu, it's like you put something under a heat lamp, you apply heat to it to purify, kill all the germs. But actually, there's ways where you can apply radiation, for example, to something, and that just doesn't kill just the germs, that just kills everything, right? Like, there's no life left at all. And so Ketu has to do with that really, really harsh sort of purification measures as well. And so in a way, that's what strychnine sort of, they use it to, like, I remember as well, I used to work with cars a little bit when I was younger, and I was very working with all that technical stuff, and I love going to the shop and stuff like that. And so we use a lot of like antifreeze fluid. And it's just whatever in Canada, I guess in India, they probably don't even need antifreeze. But we use a lot of this sort of antifreeze fluid in our cars so that things don't freeze up. But this antifreeze has a really nice taste, a really sweet flavor, but it's poisonous. It'll kill you. And what would happen is animals, dogs or cats, would get in and they would eat this because it tastes very good, and they'd drink up this antifreeze and they would die. So again, they had to add something else to the antifreeze to kind of, so it doesn't kill people, to kill animals, for example. So it's kind of interesting ways we use the poison for kind of the purpose of good, you could say. And again, adding poison to something that's already poison, it seems kind of strange, right? But it's to kind of help save people and help people out, which is Ashwini wants to really do. So the other thing we often find, well, got some say that the Rash tree, the coconut, or the pomegranate also have to do with Ashwini. Now, coconut is an interesting one because, well, Aries placements generally, they have something to do with the blood, right? So you would think that the Ashwini Nakshatra might have something to do with the transportation of blood through the body. Might have something to do with the beating of the heart, because as we'll see below, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of kind of pulsation, that tick, 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 that sort of thing going on in Ashwini. But coconut, they say that actually, if you're in a pinch, you can transfuse coconut milk or coconut water as blood, and it'll actually work as blood in the body. And so you get that. You get pomegranate as well, which is very sort of purifying, a blood purification sort of thing. The Rash tree, I'm not so familiar with myself, but they often say there's a tree here where you can make an incense out of it. And that might be, you might be able to make some incense out of the Rash tree. I'm not so sure, but you might find some burning of the coconut husk. You find a lot of like, well, it's funny because Aries is the head, but Ketu of the Ashwini is headlessness. And so you find a lot of rituals and stuff in India where they take the coconut, and the coconut often is representing the head. And then they sacrifice that head somehow. They break it open, they throw it in the river, they, whatever they do, they so they're using that. But a lot of times it's a symbol of the head. And so it's that ritual is kind of the cutting off of the head. And we find that in a lot of healing practices. I was talking yesterday about this sense of cutting off the head being like, if you want to do energetic medicine or an energetic healing, that's one of the first things you want to do is cut off the client's head. But I think to a certain degree, in order to do any kind of energy medicine, you have to cut off your own head, right? You can use reason and logic and all those things so far, but then you have to kind of jump. And so Ashwini is really the jump. Now we've jumped. We've gone from just being universal energy, and now boom, here's something particular. Wow, what's this? So here we are giving this strange class. So we're coming down to, we've done an hour already. I really wanted to come into, I'll probably go through those things quicker in the later classes because we've kind of gone through them now. And the Ashwini is going to be a lot of other stuff coming in. Gandamul nakshatras. This is anytime you get this, so you get, when you go through the signs and the houses, for example, you have fire, earth, air, water, fire, earth, air, water, fire, earth, air, water. And so wherever you get the junction between fire and water, you're going to get what they call a Gandamul nakshatra. And what that is it's this junction part. Ganda is like dirt, you could say. It's some impurity. And so again, it's that impurity of individuality, I think, has to do with the Ashwini Nakshatra in particular. But there's often, the energy there is very unstable, going from water, fire to water or water to fire. It's very unstable point. And so whenever you get transiting planets there, you get some problems. Oftentimes you get some sort of difficulties in the family, or maybe some, what most people think like a necessary part of the family group might be, you're missing something. All right. Maybe a sibling is born and then dies young. Maybe there's a parent sort of missing in the family. So you get these kind of gaps somehow. And I think that sort of relates to some of the unusualness, the oddness that you can get. Now we'll see, of course, Mars is moving up to Tikona and Aries. That's at the very last part. You could say Pada 4, Mars. So you could say that's Mars's. Look at Tikona is like his office. It's his workspace, but it's very natural workspace. And he really likes being there. They like what they do, right? These planets. And so when they're in their natural office, they're quite happy. And the sun is also exalted in the first parts of Ashwini. So that's that sort of fieriness can do quite well here, but sometimes it can be a little bit too fiery. It's like the sun, when sun's exalted, maybe a little bit too much ego, a little bit too much me, a little bit not so much paying attention to what's going around, just doing whatever sort of comes. Ashwini Kumars, we're kind of talk about all of those as we go. I think, again, you can kind of read that. The horses, a lot of that freedom of movement of the horse, so important with any of the Ketu nakshatras, that sense of freedom. You get this, well, it generally represents the knees and the upper feet. And so you'll get a lot of that movement. Now, upper feet is an interesting place because it seems to mean nothing to most of us, right? Upper feet, what is that? But there's a lot of points in acupuncture. There's one in particular, we call it the 4 gates. And what we do is there's points in the hand here, and there's point between the bone of the big toe and the next one. And these are sort of these gates we use in acupuncture to really help move energy, helps open up all the energy flows in the whole body. And in a way, that's what Ashwini, if that energy of Ashwini can flow and it's an open channel, well, then you get a Tesla, right? You get this person that invents a whole bunch of things and nobody understands what they're doing until the next generation, until the next sort of season comes, and then you sort of understand. And so the upper feet does have some of that sort of thing. Get a lot of fevers, a lot of stuff to do with the head. Not one of the main things here, but this is Aries as well. And so Ashwini also has to do with some of that head stuff. Anything that's going to make you delirious is any kind of, like, you get a high fever and you're kind of like, oh, I don't even know hardly what was happening for 2 days, or any of these things where you kind of lose your mind a little bit. I found a lot of the famous people, and even a lot of the doctors and stuff, like you get a lot of people will see below have studied chemistry or pharmacology. Like someone like Sigmund Freud, he's got some Ashwini placements. You got a lot of fathers of, like, I wouldn't say a father of the field, but a founder, an initiator of a new field of study, or initiator of a new field, period, kind of comes out of Ashwini. And so I found a lot of cocaine use, because Ashwini is that powder, that dust. And so if Ashwini placements are going to kind of go into the field, into doing like drugs or illegal drugs, a lot of times they go into cocaine, they go into those powders, they go into kind of pharmaceutical type stuff. Even if they're doing natural medicine, they're probably crushing and using these fine powders. Or I would say like a fine mist spray kind of stuff. And so we'll get a lot of that head kind of stuff. Prosthetic limbs has a lot to do with Ashwini, which is very interesting. I haven't fully gone into this. It was a while that I studied this, but you'll see a lot of I think Terry Fox. I'm pretty sure he's got Ashwini placements. I can't remember what planet. We'll go see these people below. But you see a lot of prosthetic limbs. Terry Fox, he was this guy who ran across Canada back in the 80s to raise money for people with prosthetic limbs. And so he brought a lot of attention and awareness, that sort of stuff. And so you'll see that. I think, like, common thing, glasses. I think my Ketu and Ashwini has to do with my hearing problems. I wear hearing aids. This Nakshatra project, because I went years, I didn't even have a computer. And when I started this Nakshatra project, I had to go out and I had to get a good, decent laptop. And so I've been staring at a computer now for, I guess, it's been over 2 years. And so I'll probably need glasses for the next couple of years as well. And so those are also kind of aids, right? Hearing aids. The glasses help aid our disability. Now, some of the stuff, it was like, I think I found 1 or 2 people that had gout in their life and they had some Ashwini placements. And so I was like, gout, Guillain-Barré syndrome. Again, Ketu often has to do with tingling, numbness, sensations. And so again, the illnesses we're going to get related to that will be tingling, numbness, that sort of stuff. Yeah, I was kind of looking at swollen feet. I'll have to look and see. Now, that's the other thing. Liver and kidney will often show problems in the feet, and they'll show problems sometimes in the hearing and the eyes, at least energetically speaking. The points on the toes are actually often used for when people have liver problems. As well, they get used for to help kind of clear the liver heat or liver stagnation, we say in acupuncture. Same with these points. So that 4 gates is really opening up a lot of those channels, and that channels for heat. And I haven't added it yet here, but this comes kind of from like what we learned from Saturn in Ashwini. Just, can I do this? I can do what I want. Let's skip down to Saturn. And so Saturn is debilitated in, well, they say debilitated in Aries, generally speaking. So he's not going to do very well in Aries. And so in Ashwini, I was really, at one point, really studying the difference between what's a Saturn in Ashwini and what's a Saturn in Bharani, for example. What are the differences between these two sort of things? And really, it seemed to come down between, like, there's a lot of dopamine and serotonin, especially the dopamine, I find. In here now, dopamine is a bit of a pleasure hormone, you could say, and you would think that has a lot to do with the Bharani, but I found the Bharani had a lot more. See, it's also, dopamine's also the reward mechanism, and so again, it's that Ashwini is trying to do all these sorts of different things, and he gets some kind of reward and punishment. And so wherever they get the most reward, they'll start to do more of that. And so in a sense, there's that sort of thing comes up with that dopamine. And we find planets like Venus doesn't do very, it does and it doesn't. In a sense, you could say Venus might do too well in Ashwini. Because again, it's like 9 marriages. There are a whole lot of relationships they tend to have, or these very oddball relationships where we're not really sure. I talked a lot about this. Let's just kind of look at some of these names we get in here. And so you get these kind of like even someone like Tulsi Gabbard, nobody really sure where her husband is, where her partner is. Jack Nicholson completely avoided getting married, but he's had lots and lots of relationships, no problem there. Venus and Ashwini, and so someone like him certainly has had a lot of like younger relationships, really like youthfulness, a lot of energy there. And so we see like a lot of these people have not had great relationships or very clear relationships in their lives. But Ashwini, Venus and Ashwini is very sexy. And so they get a lot of relationships, and they don't mind initiating that a relationship, initiating that negotiation. And again, that has a lot to do with that flirtiness that we see, that sort of playfulness that we see in Ashwini generally. Someone like Sigmund Freud, his marriage made it through, but he had all kinds of relationships in between and underneath that. There's another psychoanalyst here, Heinz Cahoot, in the third pada also. There are different ways I could have ordered this, but I wanted to kind of keep it ordered by pada to do that side of the research, which you can see I haven't finished yet. But you kind of get that sort of stuff. Arthur Conan Doyle, he sort of initiated that whole like genre of mystery writing that came out of after him. There's a lot to do. We think of Bharani having a lot to do with birth, bearing a child, for example. I would almost say, in a sense, Ashwini has to do with rebirth. And there is still a lot of birthing sort of metaphors that come up here. We get like I can't pronounce that, Stanislawa Lezen somebody or other. Anyways, we get this midwife, and she was actually interred in Auschwitz back in the day, so she was also a prisoner, but she was kind of the midwife for the Auschwitz space. And so really working with birth, a lot of, like, again, we get that Aries and Mars signs generally have a lot to do with blood. And we think of that almost spurting, that pulsing of the blood, that pulsing of the heart. But we get that like very chaotic energy of something new. And this is what birth is like. When a child is born, it's like, it's such a chaotic energy. And well, at least in those times, and a lot of people now, even they're like, oh, I don't want to know if it's going to be a boy or a girl. So you don't know anything. It's just what comes out is now you have to deal with that. But it's a very bloody, chaotic event, childbirth. And there's actually, we talk about the birth side of it, but until relatively modern times, there was a lot of death, like a lot of, it was very, very dangerous for women to have children. And it's still, there is still quite dangerous. And so it's a very, very chaotic event. And so it's good that someone here has that sort of thing. So we see some of that mysticism coming out. Morgan Freeman, he's an actor, but he once kicked me off. His entourage kicked me off of Gatton Varanasi because they were filming some kind of mystical sort of documentary. The funny thing is, there was about 10 of us there. We were sitting with some Babaji, and nobody knew it was Morgan Freeman. We all thought it was another guy. Varanasi people. So you get this sort of stuff. Here's Deva Pramal's name here. Now here too, you'll get the names of people like private clients. And so you get like, Christine is kind of interesting. So a lot of that Ramdas has some placements in Ashwini now. It's a lot of that power of now stuff coming in. And so Christine, she actually teaches astrology online, but she's done very, very well in like bringing Vedic astrology to the Western astrologers in the West. And so she's kind of become a friend of mine over the years, but like she's dealing with all these Western astrologers. So over and over and over, she keeps telling them that Vedic astrology is different from Western astrology. Right? She always has to give these explanations. And I have to say a little bit of this, my clients, but I'm not, I'm almost bringing Vedic astrology to people who already studied some Vedic astrology, right? The new students, they're going to come and look at my website and just go away from it. I'll get a few of these people who maybe they're new to Vedic astrology, but it's because they've met me, sort of thing. But Christina's really bringing some new product to the West. And I think she calls it astrology now, right? So it's like now, here it is. And she's quite innovative that way. I think she's starting, and this is too bad, but I think she's starting to blend the Vedic with the Western astrology. And personally, I think that just kind of breaks down the Vedic astrology and makes the whole thing useless. But some people are doing that. There's a few people here, like quite a few of these people are working with Ayurveda, and they're working with these Indian systems actually. Now I've got a lot of Western people, and so Ayurveda and these Indian systems it's alternative medicine. It's something unique and creative. There's at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, wow, there's a lot of people working with music here. At least the people I know, the famous people, not so much that I can think of, but at least all these people that I know, they're all working with some kind of sound therapy, music healing. Well, Kim D isn't, but she's into jazz. Her and her husband are like jazz musicians, that sort of thing. A lot of freedom, open relationships comes up in here. I know a few of these people have had open relationships, and very happy with that. There's a few like Sigmund Freud psychoanalysis, Michael McAdee psychoanalysis down below, um, Heinz Knut the psychoanalysis, quite a few psychoanalysts. Again, these kind of healers doing a lot of the back and forth kind of chatting. If I go down to the fourth pad, I find a lot of my friends and a lot of people that I've done reading for very similar to those second pada ones. Again, Anna working with a lot of, Anna's great. She's a big Guruji, you could say, Kali Babaji, but also working a lot with sound and music, not so much. See, it's like Kim and Anna, like she's working with music, and there's a side of, nowadays they do like music therapy and music healing. Music has always been therapy and music has always been healing, right? They're not doing anything special, right? It's like the jazz, right? Like, remember when my father was in the hospital and he was dying, and I didn't know many people around, and I was at this restaurant I used to always go to, and kind of good friends with the servers because I've been going for quite a few years. And so I was talking to one of the servers, and she was like, "There's this great jazz band in town. Why don't you just go to that and just blow off some steam?" And so that's what I ended up doing. Just like that, I went and kind of listened to the jazz, and it was a jam band, jazz music. Anyways, very innovative sort of stuff, and it was very healing for me. It was kind of just what I sort of needed at the time. Um, People are like, your dad was dying in the hospital and you went to a jazz concert. I was like, I needed it. Um, Not a huge concert goer, so it was great. And so there's it's like Anna as well, but she's involved with a lot of this, like, the people that are doing music around her, they're using these really ancient instruments, and she gets involved with these people that really is these jammers. They just all kind of meet and get together, and they're all doing their own thing, but they come together once in a while and just jam and play really incredible sort of healing, energetic music. And so you get a lot of that sort of stuff with Ashwini placements. Now, you ever get any questions about a particular placement or an Ashwini placement, feel free to ask. I'm just gonna, but you can read everything yourself. So we're just gonna I'm gonna open up these and we'll look at some of the people that have the placements. And so we see that Mercury and Ashwini does quite well. It's a little bit harsh, right? You got guys like Hitler, and Tamerlane was basically a Hitler, as well. Tony Blair was basically a Hitler as well. You get some pretty brutal sort of people here, but I think Ashwini does well, Mercury does well in Ashwini because Mercury can deal with that duality very, very well. He's also a very dual planet. And so he can kind of jump from one to the other. And really that duality comes out. It's like, well, Hitler, for example, he's just trying to purify Germany in a sense, right? And he's like, oh, we're going to purify. And he's really kind of following this higher wisdom of that purity. But there's like that other side to the purity. It's like I said, when Ketu purifies something, he completely irradiates it and completely eliminates it. And so you get that side, well, I'm purifying, but well, what are you doing? You're completely destroying, killing something. And Tamerlane was trying to do the same thing with the Muslim faith. And especially in countries like India, but he did this all over the place, completely just like go into a place and just kill everybody there. Like just kill all the Hindus, kill all the, can't say that because he did it to Muslims as well, who weren't really following his line. And so Tamerlane really was indiscriminate in his killing. And ultimately Hitler was too at the end, right? It started off with this thing, he wanted to get rid of some Jews, but the end, he was just kind of killing everyone. And Tony Blair, he's got a very nice face because his face shows up beside the British flag, right? And so generally history treats them quite good, at least where I come from. But he was the same as Hitler, right? He went in fully illegal wars in Iraq and just obliterating cultures and just totally, they don't even know half the stuff this guy's done in Africa and these other places, but just involved with totally wiping people out. Like the Titanic, it sunk and it wiped things out. Now it's interesting. I put the Titanic. It's the time of the first help signal. So when you're on a boat, I can't remember what exactly a blast it is, but you're sending out help in two ways. You're sending these blasting of the horn, meh, 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 which again, Ashwini is that beep, 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 beep. All of that pulsing has to do with Ashwini. And same with their signaling of the lights. There would be a certain time, set off a flare every half hour, whatever, depends how many flares they had or whatever. And so you get that. And then Ashwini is like looking for help and like going and retrieving. And so there was a lot of that sort of energy sort of going on, especially in the signaling for help. Come and help us, come and get us out of our mess. I would say guys like Hitler and Tamerlane and Tony Blair also, like Tony Blair is a good example because he's like, oh, we're going to go in and help the Iraqi people, right? And so they're going in to help, but like the Titanic, the help didn't really get there, and most of those people died on the boat. But it did. It got there late, and some people lived, and you hear some of the stories from it. What else? Like we talk about that therapeutic aspect of Ashwini. It gets talked about all the time. Oh, they become doctors, healers, helpers, the physicians of the gods, the Ashwini Kumars. And it's like, look at this list of names with Mercury in here, for example. It's like, who is a healer here? David Koch, chemical industries. I think a lot of pharmaceuticals. Okay, he has something to do with that. George Lopez sort of claims that his comedy is meant for healing. He did a lot of like, well, what they call in the old days was a lot of racist comedy, and now they say he's kind of anti-racist comedy. But he's trying to heal those rifts between the Mexicans and the whites in America through his comedy. So there's some very loose sort of thing. Sam Walton's a good example of a lot of the transportation. He started Walmart, and really the secret of Walmart is logistics. But it's like you don't really find those things consistent. It's there, and you find it. Robert Bustani, he's like a yoga therapy, physical therapist sort of guy, but actually he was a physicist. More like that, studying the atoms and sort of stuff like that. Um, Richard Wagner, I can't remember if that's the musicologist or not, but this next guy I wrote that he was an engineer, and so you're not finding really clear anything in a way. When we look at some of these placements,
It's
but
almost like
it's, pardon me.
it's almost like all those like people have that like innovative like bringing something new, like, oh, like I'm gonna heal Germany, you know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah,
not like they're real, not that they're great healers, but you know what
yeah,
I mean? They're like self-proclaimed, like this is just what I do, like kind of thing.
ex-
Like I mean, like, you know what I mean? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's not really a specific to the therapist, but like you say, I'm going to heal Germany. I'm going to help those poor Iraqi
Yeah.
people, right? Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So I mentioned things like some of the cocaine use, and Freud was a big time cokehead. I don't talk about it much. Eric Clapton was also very famous for that. Julian Lennon, John Lennon's son, he did a lot of cocaine and things like that as
Interesting
well.
that Ramdas is there.
Ramdas, yeah,
Yeah.
he did cocaine as well.
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know about Ramdas, but Ramdas was
No, no.
actually he was gay, and he didn't tell anyone for years and years and years until very late, and he was very scared to tell anybody he was gay. And that he does has a Ashwini placements, I know, but so he had this sort of gay partner in the background, and I think the people around maybe suspected. And so by the time he came out and told the world he was gay, he was expecting all this backlash, and everybody was like, yeah, so what's the big deal? Um, and so he also had that, but he's also
Yeah. Well, he's in the Mercury.
hmm?
You put him right there in Mercury and Ashwini. Ramdas
Okay, yeah, he's here
in the
some.
bottom next to Russell Crowe.
Okay, down here. So yeah, it's uh it's interesting. We look at those first. Ashwini, you get guys like Hitler, Tamerlane, Breyer, a lot of really Sam Walton, really big, powerful leaders. And then you get someone like Immanuel Kant, who's a great, really wonderful philosopher. Probably the closest the Western philosophers came to some kind of Eastern philosophy and really dealing with the duality in a open and fair way, dualities of life, you could say. But then you get down here, Tagore, um, great sort of poet saint of India, Swami Lakshmanju. I found a bit of a different timings for them. But Swami Lakshmanju, he's basically my Adi Guru, my guru's guru. And then you would go back from Swami Lakshmanju. His guru was like 11th century Abhinavagupta. And so you get this, I think that might be some of the pairing, Lakshmanju, especially the writings and the scriptures. He brought up a lot of those ancient scriptures forward and started teaching it to Western students and Lakshmanju students. I'm mentioning this because it's Mercury and Ashwini. Lakshmanju students, a lot of his students were these Western PhDs, and a lot of them became like Sanskrit scholars. And so they've gone on and jeepers, a lot of what we know, Kashmiri Shaivism, for example, that whole modern Tantra, all of that is coming from Lakshmanju in modern times for the most part, at least from the Western perspective. Before Lakshmanju, it was like almost nothing scriptural was really understood then. So you get that sort of thing. Tagore, of course, great poet saint. But Tagore, is he the author of the Hanuman Chalisa? I think he is, or maybe Tulsi Das. Tulsi Das, sorry. Um, so anyways, you get some of these guys, really great philosophers, right? Like Kant, and these others. And they're dealing with very, very, very abstract philosophies. And I think that abstraction really comes in, that alternativeness really comes into Ashwini. Malcolm X again, right, trying to heal the rift between the blacks and the whites. Karl Wolf, he was sort of more of a Hitler sort of fellow. I think he was one of these Polish Nazis after Second World War. He kept teaching and training. He was very involved in recruitment, I believe. Edward Smith Osborne in Sun Sea. These are really great military leaders. And so it's interesting we find that with Mercury, but I think it has a lot to do with the tactics and coming up with new tactics, new analysis, new strategies, and that sort of thing that Mercury sort of deals with. Timothy McVeigh, he was also sort of military trained. He was had a manifesto. He was considered a terrorist, I guess, in the US. Maybe some small right wingers consider him a folk hero, maybe. What did he blow up? He blew up a building, not World Trade Center. Anyways, he blew up some building in the US. Richard Feynman. Oh, this guy's interesting. And I mentioned somewhere else, we found a lot of physicists have Ashwini placements as well. I mentioned that sort of dealing with like the wave or the particle. And Feynman is really, really, he's one of the big gurus of this sort of particle physics in modern times, nuclear physics sort of stuff. And there is a lot of that almost nuclear physicism in Ashwini because, again, it's like that original, we think of original sin, and if we think that original mala, impurity of individuality, that's the atom. The atom now has like a nucleus and a proton and electron and a nucleus even, right? 3 parts actually, but it's that splitting of the atoms, that separation. And now you've got this like just oneness and something split off. And so that was sort of happens within atomic physics, as that splitting, that separation, same as birth. It's that cutting of the umbilical cord, that craziness of separation, of being pulled away from something. So, and actually a lot of the poetry of Lakshmanju in particular has to do with that original impurity and that original like being separate for God and wanting to reunite, you could say. And so there might be, again, a lot of these warriors I think were involved with, like, go in, extract something, bring it out, and everybody sort of, we call it a muster point in construction, a meeting point. And so Ashwini can also kind of act that way. I knew 2 hours wasn't going to be enough for these classes. But Ashwini in particular, because we're kind of going over a bunch of other stuff as well. So got about 20 minutes left. Do you have any questions or comments at this point? So,
I have a comment. Something can be interesting.
okay. What is it?
Yeah, I have Jupiter and Ashwini, and right now it's my Jupiter return. Is it working? Yeah. And anyways, and I'm like you were talking about like what was it, like opening? I don't know. Anyways, I'm opening for a band on Saturday. And what was the only other thing that I would resonate with? Oh, God damn it. I forgot.
Okay.
Yeah, like you were saying, like entertainment that starts before the party starts and
Okay.
things like that. Oh, I've been picking like actually trash off the street. Like, I mean, I've always been doing this, but recently it's like shiny stuff.
Yeah.
I pick like shiny things, and I'm gonna make this kind of like art, like painting with all my shiny things that I find in the street. And I just started doing that, and it's my I mean, I'm like transiting the same placement that I have right now, which
Okay.
is Jupiter Ashwini, and I just thought it was funny because
Yeah,
it's like
you
so
know,
straight,
some other
you know?
time too, you're taking some kind of garbage and making something out of it as well. Things people were
I
throwing
love
away.
that. I live for
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's
All
that.
my clothes, everything. Yeah.
So there, I'm glad we get to hear from an Ashwini themselves on that. Yeah,
Yeah.
Jupiter Ashwini is interesting, and I think I started that with the quote from Dostoevsky: "If there's no God, then anything is permitted," and that's that sort of unbound philosophy, that unbounded sort of dogma, that area where everything is sort of permitted. I did some extra. I'll be posting these soon. You can see a couple of posts. Popes had this Jupiter and Ashwini, and they were very much involved with reforming in the church and bringing the old ideas of church up into modernity. Charlemagne, right, the old Roman Empire, and brought it into a modern time. Very religious and spiritual in their ways, but for popes at their time, they were considered a little bit unusual, trying to do some strange things, right? Trying to kind of bring the orthodox old ways, bring them up into modern times and understand them. Thomas More was an interesting one. Ayn Rand is interesting. It's like their philosophy. Ayn Rand is considered a philosopher, very individualist. I think her philosophy was even called individualism. Might say objectivism, individualism. But she's really kind of revered as a philosopher by some people, but the academic philosophers don't consider her a philosopher at all. They're like, your philosophy doesn't stick together. Your ideas don't logically cohere. And that's that Ashwini influence, that lack of sort of hard cohesion. Noam Chomsky's interesting. He found a lot of language and linguistics and working a lot with that sort of thing. And language and linguistics, I find it so, I studied this back in my day in university. I was studying like this sort of stuff. And I found it so philosophical and deep. The whole sense of like, one of Noam Chomsky's ideas about language was like, grammar is innate. And then we put the word and the words and the whatever language belongs to our culture, we put that into the grammar. But the grammar side is that innate side. And Ashwini's very both sides, right? Working with the innate abilities, but how that matches with nature. And so it's very much that nurture nature sort of thing. And a lot of that will come through. Alejandro Jodorowsky. If you want to learn about Jupiter and Ashwini, watch this guy's movie, the Holy Mountain. Some people can't. Did I write about this? Anyway, some people can't get through the first 10 minutes of this movie. They're like, that's just sick, just weird and odd, and I can't deal with any of that. But if you can get past the first 20 minutes, maybe, it's such a rewarding movie. And you can see the psycho magic and psycho shamanism, and he really ended up defining his own religion, basically. And as we see, he just blended a bunch of things together. And that's one of the things Jupiter and Ashwini, we find them doing. Even their popes, okay, they're Catholics, but what they started to do is bring in some external elements and blend that with the Catholic faith in order to kind of modernize it or update it to a certain degree. Yeah, that was a pretty interesting sort of bunch with their Jupiter Ashwinis. You can say Empress Wu Zetian. She was maybe the only, but certainly the first female empress of China. Martin Luther King, of course, very reform. Find a lot of there's a few warriors with this, but with the Jupiter and Ashwini, they're mostly pacifists. They're mostly anti-war. Ayn Rand really was anti-war. Dostoevsky was in the army a bit, right? Was he a military engineer? I'm getting Trotsky confused. But anyways, but still very much a pacifist. Didn't do well in the army at all. Who else? Nigel Farr, pacifist. Thomas More. Thomas More actually died for his pacifism. He was the advisor to King Henry VIII, who was quite brutal. he's famous for like killing all his wives. And at the time, divorce was basically illegal then. And so and so King Henry VIII, he got married anyways to Catherine of Oregon. And then he wanted to divorce her, and the church said, no, you can't get a divorce. And so Thomas More ended up joining him as an advisor. And Thomas More agreed with the church, and he was like, I'm sorry, no, you can't get divorced. And so he lost his head. That's some of the headlessness we see in Ashwini. He's very brutally of Thomas More, but he ended up losing his head. I can't remember if Henry VIII himself had any placements here. I think the Queen Bloody Mary, who took over after him, I think she's got some placements in Ashwini, and she took a lot of heads as well. Like that. So you see a little bit of that sort of stuff. Oh, there's Aja Gabor with Jupiter here. I mentioned her. Well, there's Andrian with this placement. And it's like, you see a couple doctors here, and there's Vikash is a doctor. He's afraid of death, and so he's probably going to find some sort of alternative way to offer his doctoring. Evgena very much working with Ayurveda and healing. I think Andrian's working some of that. Sai Chandigarh, Sai Chi, sorry. He was he's also very much sort of working with healing fields and that. I think he's getting into dance therapies and stuff nowadays. Pranal Baba, he left home. He just walked out the door at 18, and when he's walking out there, fighting with his father, and when he's walking out the door, his father said something along the lines, well, those are my shoes. I bought you those shoes. I bought you those clothes. And so he took off his shoes and he took off his clothes and said, to hell with you. Have all your stuff back. And so he ended up walking away from home with nothing. He's been walking for about 6 years now, since he was, I think, 18 or 19 when he did that. And he's never taken any money. So he's a bit of a healer Baba as well. Something odd about him, right? Panal, something odd about him, Mr. T, Alexander Jodorowsky, something odd about like all of these, something like just off about them in a sense, most of them anyways. Guys like Russell Crowe, we just know him from his movies, but he's probably a very different person than we know him from his movies. That kind of offness can be there as well. Look, I think I did some of it with Shuni. Yeah, here's the Michelangelo. See, Ashwini, Venus and Ashwini. This is where I noticed in particular, a lot of these people were, I don't know, have any proof, but involved with some of them, but I'm pretty sure involved with cocaine use or drug use. We've got a couple also kind of Babajis here or spiritual healers here, but they're also using drugs, either ayahuasca, or these kind of things get involved. Well, again, cocaine as well, get some of these people. Sigmund Freud did a massive research study on the effects of cocaine on the nervous system. What's that, Andrian?
Just Eric Clapton's song Cocaine, and he's in that list, so I thought that was funny.
Yeah, he had somewhere else. He's got the actual song Cocaine. Now I think what's happening with the Venus and Ashwini is that's looking for that sense of that reward mechanism of the dopamine. And so they're always looking for another hit of that sort of pleasure drug and that pleasure emotion. And so that comes up. And so they're doing it in a lot of ways, not just through drugs, but they're doing it through kind of party atmosphere or very open relationships, getting that dopamine hit through their partnerships and that sort of stuff. And really in some way, but they get that dopamine hit and they go a little bit goofy, right? And you'll meet this. It's like, I want to say, like, I know Christine is a little bit like this, and Brooke is certainly, Elena is like this as well. Kim was probably, anyways, they get a little bit, they get a little bit like, when they're getting that hit and that pleasure, they get a little bit funny, like that giggly girl who just can't stop sort of giggling. She's just, I'm having so much fun, right? And that kind of pleasure is too much for them in a sense. Kind of thing. And I would know people like they can really, when they're having fun, they really become those really sort of giggly little girl sort of energy, especially in a lot of the women I know that has that. But like Shaquille O'Neal, he's famous for his parties. He would just go crazy for weeks on end. And then we come down here and we got some of these are involved with geochemistry. Ed Belfour was a famous cokehead. Salvador Dali was really strong into drugs. Warren Beatty was strong into drugs. All right, a lot of them really, really strong into drugs. I don't know about Joe T, but I know the crowd she hangs around with. This is an interesting thing with younger yogis in the West. A younger yoga is very disciplined and very militaristic. I'm not sure about Joe T, but I know a lot of her friends are in this younger, and a couple of them that I know for sure, these younger teachers in the West, they're actually doing a lot of cocaine to keep their energies levels up so they can teach, say, the number of classes that they're teaching and keep teaching yoga with the intensity that they teach yoga at. And so you get these kind of like double-sided sort of things going on there. With these placements. So here we see Rahu and Ashwini. This was what the heck was his name again? Jackson. Anyways, the artist, Paul Jackson. Anyways, it's below. He used to do all the just crazy art, like probably can hardly see that, but he's just drizzling this paint. Right, just drizzling paint on the canvas. And so that's very Ashwini. That's kind of crazy. Oh. Kind of crazy stuff like that. Who do we have? Sigmund Freud has a lot of placements in Ashwini. Genghis Khan, I think he really innovated a lot of military techniques that were very, very useful for him. There's that speed of Ashwini. We see someone like Donovan Bailey. He was once the fastest man alive, sort of a thing. We see Pranal Baba has placements here. Ray Charles was the blind singer. What else are we getting here? So many great philosophers and scientists, I find, generally have these places like Spinoza, right? It's Rahu there, but some of the other, we talked about Kant and some of these guys. Mark Garneau working with NASA, working with robotics. Neil Armstrong also went to the moon. Ken Wilber, he was a great philosopher, but he called himself a philosophical entertainer, actually. But we get these really high people just working really deep in the sciences here and really doing something new, going to space, for example. John Locke, Thomas Sowell, these are great philosophers. Jonas Vermeer and Antoine van Leeuwenhoek, they're interesting. Vermeer was an artist, very much involved with the well, they called it Impressionism, but he's doing a lot of the Dutch landscapes and a lot of that kind of innovation in the art in that regards. But there's not much known about Vermeer. A little bit more about Leeuwenhoek. They were actually friends. Leeuwenhoek was the kind of one of the heads of the town and things like this. And Leeuwenhoek he's on this list. Yeah, in the dust. Leeuwenhoek was making lenses, grinding, polishing these lenses. And so a lot of that dust was coming out from there. I think he also has some Mulla placements. And so really working with making microscopes and really early at that time. But Johannes Vermeer was actually using some of Leeuwenhoek's ways of, say, you can was almost like an early camera in a way, where like someone would sit there in front of him, and then he would use these lenses to project the image of that person that's sitting there onto his canvas. And so in a way, then he would just sort of trace out that person. And so he was using a lot of very, very innovative techniques at the time. I'm going to keep talking. If anybody has to go, right, we said it was 2 hours. If anybody has to go ahead and go, but I'm going to keep talking a little bit longer here. Like that. And so oh, there goes one. So then we get, these sort of innovative, very innovative, making robots, for crying out loud. Like, look at these people really doing unique, interesting things. You get someone like Christine Gilbert. This is a good example of Rahu and Ashwini. Christine Gilbert also trying to help people out, but she was killing her patients. Right? She was killing people. Mass murder. I don't know. I think it was like 350 patients, people she suspected of killing. And so you get this sort of thing there as well. The alternative medicines, alternative health cares really start to come out with Rahu. Those really strong alternative sort of ways of doing things. The Treaty of Lancaster, that was a setup, I think. I can't remember exactly what happened there, but I think they signed this treaty and got a bunch of blacks to show up somewhere and then killed them all. That was certainly the case. St. Bartholomew Day Massacre was also an Ashwini placement that did something like that. We start to get more, it seems a lot of economic theories start to come out with the Rahu placement here, like John Hawke, Thomas Sowell, Anthony Leeuwenhoek. He was also involved with those sorts of things. But there was also a lot of, like, Herbert Hoover. He was the head of the Secret Service in the USA for a long time. Johannes Vermeer is suspected to be involved with a lot of. Johannes Vermeer owned it was an art, what was it? It was an inn. But the inns at that time were where the art dealing was going on. And even today, art dealings, international art deals, a main way of laundering money, actually. And so then you get a lot of the Secret Service gets involved in that sort of thing, and a lot of these sort of hidden deals and moving things secretly around. And so Johannes Vermeer was basically like Secret Service. Antoine Leeuwenhoek was Secret Service. Wild Bill Hickok, he wasn't, but he was on the other side of the law. Richard Gatling, I think he was like KGB or something. No, not KGB, but he was also involved in the American military. Made the Gatling gun in the early days, right? Clint Eastwood, you can go on YouTube and you can find like Clint Eastwood's kill list. And it's a video that goes for like an hour of just like everybody Clint Eastwood killed in a movie. Right, Joe Rogan, Din Diesel, these are tough fighters. Sonny Liston, a boxer. George Foreman, a boxer. David Carpenter was also a mass murderer. And so these people, whether it's on television or in real life, especially that third show, I didn't notice this before, but they most of them are killing people or really beating them up and damaging them quite badly. Roy Rogers was like the early Clint Eastwood, right? He was the old cowboy guy going around bang, bang, bang. Karina Benham, she hasn't killed anyone that we know of yet, but she's a ex-wife of a family member. And she hasn't killed anyone, but there's some abandonment, that letting go. She really she abandoned a lot of family. Al Josa also kind of walked away from his family to take a little bit like, oh, that was another Jupiter placement. Al Josa is also much more materialistic, but he left his family to become kind of a Babaji as well. Prince Charles of Wales, this is old information. He's now King Charles. Brahmananda Yogananda, interesting as well, a healer. You probably know his book. really talking about miracles sort of happening in a lot of cities. But again, really, he's almost as big of a leader as Prince Charles in some way. And so you get these kind of Gian Gomeshi, Ozzy Osbourne. These are leaders with a little bit of darkness behind them. There's some shadowiness in their innovations. Like Gian Gomeshi, he was a radio guy, best new alternative music in Canada, sort of thing. But actually, he wasn't picking the best music for anyone. He was picking especially the girl bands who would sleep with them. And so this kind of she's nodding. And so there's that Rahu, that kind of cloudiness, and what these people are sort of doing really comes out, especially with the Rahu and Ashwini. It's kind of interesting. Right, sort of almost top secret maybe is part of the reason for some of that cloudiness and a lot of these cases. Gian Gomeshi and Ozzy Osbourne, I would say they're probably similar sort of figures. I don't know if you know Gian Gomeshi. He's a disgrace now in radio land. He got all kinds of accusations put up against him. He did get off in court. I remember looking at his astrology chart in those days, and it's a pretty dirty chart, whether it's fully illegal what he's doing or dirtiness. And so it's a fine line sometimes that way. You could say the same for someone like Pamela Anderson, right? Is what she doing? Is she a dirty woman, or is she just a modern woman of the 21st century? Nicole Kidman, in a very different way. She was a little bit more tough, but still some cloudiness there. Margaret Trudeau, she was very young wife of Pierre Trudeau. She's kind of interesting because she probably taught Pierre Trudeau. Yeah, Pierre Trudeau she married to. So Justin Trudeau is her son. And she was very much involved in all the alternative health stuff and astrology and all of that sort of stuff. And quite likely passed that down to the Trudeau boy. And so you get a lot of this sort of things going on here. Ketu in its own nakshatra of Ashwini. First thing that came to my mind was the cosmic cowboys. They're kind of oblivious to time in some way. And this I found quite interesting. Prince was the one who inspired this, but here's Prince now on Pegasus. And so you get with Rahu and Ketu here as well, you'll still get that horse sort of themes, but it becomes more of a Pegasus. It becomes more of a unicorn. It becomes very mythological. Yeah, Yoichiro Nambu, spontaneous broken symmetry and particle physics. Not one of us probably has any idea what that is, even, but it sounds very Ashwini, right? Like broken symmetry, that's Ashwini. That's what it is. It's that kind of particle, simultaneous broken symmetry. It's like, I don't know what that means, but that's Ashwini, man. That's so Ashwini. And so you'll get these sorts of things. Really getting quite warm in here. So get this, I think this comes out in some instances. I think this Eugene Paragel is a good example of this. The Zen and the archery, right? Peace and war kind of coming together. Cicero was basically like that as well. Cicero is one of the greatest orators of all time, and he should be remembered as high as Julius Caesar, I would think, probably even more influential at the time than Julius Caesar was. But that sort of sense of like peace and war, and I think he was really kind of working for both at the same time. Madonna and Sally. Oh, here's Terry Fox. We got him here. Floyd Mayweather. We get a little bit of a See, some of these names I have no idea, like Cleopatra, is that her real birth time? To be honest, so Cleopatra seems to be matching quite well. But she's like Shakira, right? Kind of this oddball sort of a figure. Tina Turner, almost like Shakira as well. Madonna. Wow, I should have all those names together. But in a way, there's this almost a sideshow quality to Ketu and Ashwini Nakshatras, in a way. It's like Ray Kroc is like, well, it's drive-through sort of service. Yeah, he's the guy who started McDonald's. I think that was Ray Kroc. And he was a big corporate head in any case. Sort of that drive-through at the time, they had the, what they do? It was like the old A&Ws were famous for this back in the day. It wasn't a drive-through, but you just go in and park and stay in your car, and there was like a little intercom, and you just order from your car, and then they'd come out and bring it to you. Which is basically what a lot of people are treating drive-through now. They drive through and then they go park in the parking lot and eat. Um, sort of like that. I hate to say this stuff because my name's here, right? Mike H, that's me. Slam between Prince and Joseph Pilates, the guy who started Pilates. All of that. The founder of Aikido is there. Yorocho Nambo, Jack Dorsey, the founders of Twitter, founders of a lot of no lines actually. And so they're very good at sort of doing this. And again, I think there is a sense of timing and the time not meaning much to them. And I think for myself, that kind of comes out in astrology. All right, I'm looking at these astrology charts, and one of the things astrology has taught me is that the present moment, the power of now, is that it contains all time from all the past and all the future, and it's all here in this moment. And our experience is a combination of that, of where we're coming from in the past and where we're going to in the future. Even if we don't know where we're going to in the future, of course, there's a broader plan. And so I think a lot of that is Ashwini, that sort of duality, but those dualities coming together in a bit of an odd way. And so you could say generally, like Ketu and Ashwini, this was tricky because Ketu stayed in Ashwini for about 6 months every 18 years, right? And so, or 6 months. Anyways, my math is a little bit off, but close. And so it's going to stay in that time for so much time every so many years. And so it's like, are all the people that are born for that 6-month period, right? And so we're trying to find that sort of common theme in all of them. And a lot of them do have like really very, very innovative, like Madonna. She was like, well, she defined MTV. She was the guru of Shakira in a lot of ways, right? Prince was the guru of Shakira. And so they're this kind of recycling of the energy as well, and a lot of sort of rebirth, sort of, and that happens generally. But I think Ketu part of us in Ashwini places the rebirth generally. But I think the Ketu in Ashwini is very much a rebirth of a past sort of energy. And so you see a lot of big names, and a lot of these people are very much defined, and see a lot of very, very close similarities in some of them, right? Madonna and Sharon Stone, right? These are almost like rebirths of the same person. Nancy Splungen, a lot of sexual assault here, very sexual assault. I have listed once. Nancy Splungen she was killed by her partner. She was, what's that guy's name? Johnny Rotten, for the Sex Pistols, a punk band. And so she was this like hardcore punk girl. She was addicted to drugs by the time she was like 10 years old, dead by the time she was 25 or something like that. But she's not so different from like a Madonna figure or a Sharon Stone figure, right? Very loose sexually, very no boundaries to anything really, in a lot of ways. Michelle Pfeiffer, Sharon Stone, Martina Klein, these are a lot of models from the earlier days of modeling. And then you get Prince, you get Mike Holiday, Joseph Pilates. You get these people very open. It's like one of the things I find very strange about a lot of energy workers is they're treating energy work like it's something that's strange. They're treating it like I mentioned that Astrology Now, Christine, and she's working with Vedic astrology and treating it like it's something like brand new and something that's very strange and unusual. And I find with the Ketu Ashwini placements, none of this is strange at all. It's just the way it is. And so this kind of transference of energy is like that. And I mentioned the sideshow quality, and I find that with myself. I travel around a lot of different places, and like if you go to Varanasi, for instance, I'm not there now. People will probably still try to tell you to find me there. But if you go to Varanasi and start asking around for a good astrologer or a good philosopher, you're probably going to get sent to me. And a lot of people will be like, "Oh man, meeting you and just having all these talks to you in Varanasi, it's like it's the highlight of my Varanasi. It's like the that key point of the Varanasi experience for a lot of people is meeting Mike the astrologer, right? This magician in a lot of ways. And we see that in these people, like I don't want to say magician for all of them, but they are they're doing something very unusual. Cicero was a speaker that's like kind of like, hey folks, step right up, step right up. We got a new thing. And so step right up, folks. And so they kind of get up there and they just talk in front of people like that. And in a way, that's what I'm doing here. Like I'm offering this course on Ashwini, but I don't have this laid out format. I've got this research that I can help you guys to understand and help you guys sort of understand where I've been coming from and how I'm sort of seeing things. And hopefully we can all go deeper into it together. Yeah. So again, if we start to go into every placement of this, there's 12 placements for every planet. But we see some of the Ketu Ashwini second house. Beautiful models. We see some similarities in their hair, right? Beautiful women, lovely women, no problem there. Right, Jamie Saleh, she did like Stars on Ice kind of thing. Ellen DeGeneres, again, kind of these shizo sort of characters getting out there, and people are kind of coming and seeing and listening to them. Just in passing. And you can see here, like, I put a bunch of all the main classic stuff is with each of these placements, right? This one I haven't obviously done much, but you found this like shadow boxing, fighting with ghosts, right? These are boxers. I'm there as well. I studied all kinds of martial arts and fighting myself. And so I've done tons of shadow boxing. I still do a little bit of that sort of stuff with my yoga practices sometimes. Kind of like, you're just like not fighting with anyone, but here I am, right? Landing the big blow. You know what I mean? And so there's that sort of, again, the partner of the Ashwini might not be real, it's just a ghost. It's just a shadow, it's just a figment of the imagination somehow. And so we can see that kind of stuff coming up in these kind of strange ways. And so yeah, I think someone like Ray Kroc, where was the shadow boxing? Someone with Ray Kroc, we see that there as well. I think that's a little bit like his franchise and these drive-throughs, right? You just pull up and you talk to this embodied voice for a little bit and you say, I want my 3 burgers and my 2 orders of fries and my milkshake. And you just kind of tell this embodied voice, and then you drive forward and you get your food. And so there is that sort of that ghostly partner somehow, that partner who's at the distance. It's interesting, Ray Kroc. You need to think about this a little bit. I've spent a lot of time driving around. Like I've driven back and forth across Canada. I don't know how many times in my life, and Canada's a huge country. And then someone like Ray Kroc, he's also like really revolutionized the drive through and those sorts of things. And so these are kind of things we can kind of look at and try to, right now I would look into sort of Michael Rube. He was a founder of Aikido, I think, or a karate, and he was a founder of one of those fighting sets. And so you want to kind of start to look into them and see how their transport went, or see if that had sort of a drive through sort of aspect to them. And it's like myself, it's like most people meet me when they're traveling. Right? I come to these places, someone asks me, "Oh, do you live here?" I'm like, "I don't know. Much as I live anywhere, I guess I'm living here now." And so there is that. And I think that's the same with a lot of these people. Like even someone like Jack Dorsey, he was always moving around. He was the head of Twitter until the new head Twit bought it. And that sort of stuff. I'm trying to think if the new head Twit, he has Ashwini placements as well. Can't remember just where they are. And so you get that sort of stuff coming out. And these are all founders of Pinautos, founders of Twitters, founder of Pilates, World War II, founder of, I don't know, hell. Jacques Chirac, he was the founder of the, what do they call the Separatist Party in Canada? Provincially, he was the head of it as well. You find quite a few serial killers. Clifford Olson, there was that other nurse who was killing people. You had that. There's the I-5 trail killer or something. Another serial killer had some placements in Ashwini. And this might be like, if we think that Ashwinis are capable of hearing voices, right? They're dealing with that metaphysical other, then why would not be prone to things like schizophrenia and some of these other things can also happen here with Ashwini placements. So Moon Ashwini, I'll probably talk least about moon positions because, well, this is what everybody else, every website you go to will focus on the moon positions. And so, but you can see more serial killers, Paul Bernardo, Stan Lee, he was a Marvel Comics, always that good versus evil sort of thing. Lot of progressivism in a lot of these people, right? And that's kind of what, like, that progress, that sense of progress. And so they want to do something new, even if they don't know if it's going to work. And so you see that in Kamala Harris. Iyengar had that with his. Iyengar was actually, it's very odd form of yoga. I talked about a lot of those Iyengar yoga teachers doing cocaine to keep up with the fast-paced lifestyle. But Iyengar actually came out, the king of Bhutan, he has an army, believe it or not. Bhutan has an army, but not much of one, and so they weren't doing very much. And so he went to Iyengar when he was quite young, and he said, "I want you to make me a style of yoga, but take out everything that's going to make them peaceful." And that's basically what Iyengar was. So it's very harsh discipline, and it's very, even the younger yogis, their level of discipline is about as close to the military as you're going to get in any yoga practice. They're very focused, very almost militaristic in the way they do it. And so that's Iyengar. That kind of dualities that we see in Ashwini. Malcolm X at one side, he's kind of a unifier. On another side, he was a terrorist, a militant. Stan Lee, everything like very black and white, with his comics. We see, I talked about being very progressive. Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Prince Charles, Joseph Holliday was also. It's interesting. Someone like Clive Barker, horror stories, Stan Lee, not quite horror stories, but the spookiness, right? Again, they're not serial killers, but the story of Paul Bernardo is as spooky and scary as anything Clive Barker has written. Well, Clive Barker might be even more spooky and scary. And so you got that Roy Rogers, everything was very black and white, cowboyish there. Joe Biden has he said something, he called someone a name one time. Something, what was that, pony soldier? Anyways, it was a very Ashwini sort of saying. Joe Biden, pony soldier. Look that up, you'll laugh. And anyways, I had a friend, he always kind of repeating this. See, Andrian's looking it up for us, so we'll leave it at that. Did you get it? Did you find it? Well, let us know. You'll have to turn the sound on for us when you do let us know. Your sound's not on. You have to turn your sound's not turned on. I can't hear you.
Okay.
There we go.
Joe Biden calls student a lying dog-faced pony soldier.
Yeah, lying dog-faced pony soldier. No, that's very Ashwini.
And the soldier thing too, yeah. And the pony.
Yeah,
It's like everything about it.
like
Pony
everything about it is kind of odd, and then the pony.
Lion dog face pony soldier. Yeah.
So I'm just going to take you for a walk. Because I'm house sitting a place, and I think in Guatemala people burn strange things all the time. Someone's burning some plastic in it. Anyways, because I'm house sitting, I get nervous for the house, and I want to figure out what's burning. But why don't we take this as a signal to end this class today and leave it at that. Yeah, 2.5 hours, that's long enough. And so why don't we just kind of cut it off? You can keep going on and on and on and on, and there's really no end to any of it. But we've had a good chance to really kind of look into Ashwini and see how some of this Ashwini energy is sort of plays itself out. So I thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. Yeah, and have a very lovely day, and I'll see you next week, perhaps.
You as well.
Same time, same place. Mahadev.
Beautiful. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Surely.
So
Yes, but thank
did
you.
you get something from this course today?
Yes,
Okay, good.
yes.
Good.
I'm assimilating. Yes, I'll study.
Yeah, it's a little bit, and everything I teach is a little bit, for me, the most boring thing in the world is a workshop where they, I know, it's like I give them, but I hate them. Where they just like, they give you this piece of paper and they just go through it step by step by step. It's like, okay, thanks for the paper. Now you go away. I don't need you actually, because I've got your paper. And so
Yes, I can understand.
yeah, I try to bring something different than, okay, here's the paper, study that. Now let's just talk about it in a general way.
Something.
So,
Yes.
yeah. So I thank you very much for coming. It's nice to have people to talk to for me.
I am very grateful. I am very grateful that you assimilated for the class. We will meet.
Wonderful. And so I'll see you again next week. Well, no, I didn't cut you off. I'm sure. There we go.